But one thing I want to get to now, really a more important subject, frankly, is that of the hostage releases in Gaza, of which there were some yesterday and due to be some more tomorrow. So now we're going to go to Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who is the Israeli or an Israeli Foreign Ministry Special Envoy. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Fleur.
Thank you so much.
So explain to us what's happening exactly. So some names have been released today, as they have been over the last few days, that are a precursor to further releases of hostages, this drip feeding of hostages. So as I understand it, 3 hostages about to be released tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely. This is part of this psychological warfare of Hamas. You said the right word that I've been using, right words that I've been using for a week, is drip feeding. And so tomorrow we have 3 men, one over, the deal is the humanitarian cases are basically anybody over 50 or anybody who has some type of injury. And so 3 men are being released tomorrow. One of them is a US dual citizen, but one very, very concerningly is the husband of Shiri Bibas, the one who was taken with her 2 babies.
This is Yarden Bibas.
Yarden Bibas, his wife, was taken with those 2 babies, you know, this redhead family. And the fate of the mother and the 2 kids are not clear and is not looking good. And so this poor man's going to come out. He doesn't know what's happened to his 2 children and wife. And I don't know how that's going to play out.
So do you have evidence that they're not being held together?
They were never held together. We know that from the beginning. And in Israel, there's a very strong suspicion that they may not have survived. So we don't know at this point. But this poor man is coming out and he doesn't know where his family is and he doesn't know whether he'll ever see them again. It's just, the whole thing is tragic. And I'm sure you saw the scenes of the handover of the hostages and how brutal.
Well, it's now the Hamas MO, the modus operandi.
Yes.
I mean, you talk of psychological warfare. It is definitely that. It's definitely statement making, isn't it? To have Hamas warriors in full camouflage, which they don't normally wear, funnily enough, when they're trying to integrate within, the public, ordinary citizens in Gaza, wearing headbands, shouting, jeering, bullying, jostling, all part of that psychological warfare.
Absolutely. You know, we know that they had a unit that didn't fight at all during the war because they were waiting. It's like their propaganda unit. They were waiting for the day after. Look, they've all got cameras. You see, it's all very, very well curated. And then you have organizations like the Red Cross going along with it and standing on stage and taking part in this farce, giving the hostages certificates like if they'd been to a summer camp. I mean, the whole thing is sick.
And Fleur, could it not have been mandated in those negotiations? And look, you know, we can debate the ins and outs and the rights and wrongs of the fact that, yes, Israeli hostages and others, Thai hostages, are being released. But of course, the other side of that, the quid pro quo, the balance, of course, is that Palestinian prisoners, by the way, not hostages, Palestinian prisoners are also terrorists are being...
Terrorists with blood on their hands who've killed multiple people.
Yeah, are being released. And I guess, look, the big question in all of this from a humanitarian point of view, I think most would agree that deal had to be done ultimately, albeit now that those terrorists have now been released onto the streets. We'll see what happens to those in the coming weeks. But what do we think the situation is in terms of who is left in captivity, in terms of I think it was 67 hostages that we think were still being held. How many, and I hate to ask this question, but it's pertinent, how many do we think are still alive?
So, I mean, these are all great questions. And part of the deal with Hamas was that they were going to tell us who's alive and who's dead. And they still haven't come up with this information.
But why wasn't that mandated, Fleur? Why wasn't that mandated? It is. So
they always push the limits of what they've agreed to and what they actually deliver. This is why Israel last week, when they didn't deliver the civilian woman that was left, Arbel Yehud, they said, we are not going to let you come back to the north of Gaza if you don't release the civilian woman.
If you don't do as you said you were going to do.
Exactly. This is what we got to. What happens with Hamas is, let's not forget, they're genocidal terrorists. These people have no word. They have no
morals.
There's no honor. There's no morals. There's no ethics. They shoot their own children. They shoot 5-year-old Palestinian kids in the head if they think that it will serve their purposes. These people have zero morals. And so ultimately, Israel actually laid down the law and said, no, you have to comply with the agreement. And that's why they released these hostages yesterday.
So
Israel...
but what you're saying effectively, Fleur, is that Hamas have gone back on the auspices of that deal.
They've gone back, and when they realized that Israel wasn't going to take it,
so they pushed. They pushed and pushed.
They did push. They always push. And then yesterday, after the scenes that we saw, where an elderly man who was released, 80-year-old man, and this young woman, I don't know whether you saw the scenes yesterday, but they were actually very scary. It could have ended up very badly. And Israel says, well, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're not going to put up with this circus that could actually create a situation where these lives could be at risk as you're releasing them. So let's see what happens.
Yeah. Let me ask you something about an issue in Britain over the last 24 hours with regard to a Holocaust exhibition, which a parliamentary committee has rejected from being displayed in Parliament. How do you feel about that?
Well, this is part of the wave of global anti-Semitism that we've seen rise, and it's absolutely absurd.
What, from a British parliamentary committee, you think?
It's absurd because we celebrated or commemorated International Holocaust Memorial Day. Everywhere around the world, they're having different Holocaust remembrance and memorials. And so much so for Britain, that was the country that won and beat Hitler, who created the worst genocide in the last 100 years. And you can't, now the Holocaust has become political.
Well, Eric Pickles, who is, of course, a special envoy in this regard, has said that Churchill would be turning in his grave.
I know Lord Pickles very well. He's a wonderful supporter of Israel, and he would be turning in his grave. The fact that you can't commemorate the way that other genocides are commemorated, they can invite all the Palestinian protesters. They do this every Saturday. They disrupt the entire city, the entire capital, but you can't have a quiet little memorial of the Holocaust? Where are we?
This is politics at play, I guess, on the basis that the parliamentary committee presumably just doesn't want to be seen to be taking sides by having that Holocaust exhibition in Parliament. But by doing so, now it's seen to be taking sides.
Well, why is the Holocaust something that you have to take sides?
Well, no, I agree. And look, didn't we say, I mean, ever since the Holocaust, that the fact that Auschwitz is still standing is because the Holocaust must be remembered. I mean, it's a horrible, hideous, horrendous, evil thing to have to remember, but it has to be remembered, of course, to prevent it happening again. I don't think that message seemed to be translated through to that parliamentary committee, unfortunately.
Well, I think it's even more than that. You can't claim on the one hand that being anti-Israel does not being anti-Semitic, and then take something like the Holocaust, which has nothing to do with the existence of the state of Israel, and say that that's political. Which way is it? You can't have it both ways, and that's a problem.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So going back to the hostages, so you expect to see 3 released tomorrow. What's next in terms of releases thereafter?
Well, the initial phase of the deal is that 33 hostages will be released, and it's known more or less that about 8 of them are dead. So that's where we're at the moment. And then we have to negotiate for the release in the second phase of the rest of them. So there'll be another 67. And the bodies. There'll be another 60 odd left. And there is, we don't really know at this point, but it is believed that half of them will be alive and half of them will be dead. And we don't know. And that is part of this psychological warfare. And these poor families, imagine this kind of Russian roulette they're living every single day.
Fleur, I can't imagine it. Look, we've got to go. I've got to go up to the news. But look, thank you very much indeed. A very, very tough subject to talk about, and I really, really appreciate your time.